Welcome to Governance Training for CRCs. I'm Andrew Huffer, and today I'm joined by the most magnificent John Denton. Welcome back, John.
Yes, good day, Andrew. Great to be here.
And of course, today we have our special guest, Lynn Levy from WACOS. Welcome back, Lynn. Good to have you here again.
Thanks, Andrew. Glad to be here.
Fantastic. Today we've got episode 9 when we're talking about ethics. Before we move into that, I want to do a quick recap talking about episode 8, where we went through confidentiality and its importance to your CRC, especially in relation to the services that you provide. We also talked about the policies, procedures and systems to maintain confidentiality, and that was one of the key parts of the program, I think, is really think about the practical things that you can do to make changes within your CRC. In episode 9, we're getting focused on ethics. So we're going to start off by talking about what are ethics, then we'll move into talking about ethical issues that will affect your CRC. We'll do some discussion about the Code of Ethics and Conduct and wrap up with some related policy and procedures which will give you the direction to move forward. I want to start off today with us talking about what are ethics to help us really get focused on what we're talking about today. John, can you take us through that, please?
It's a big topic. Ethics, values, we could have lots and lots of discussion about this. So we'll go over a definition of what ethics is all about, and then we'll talk about some of the examples. And I think most of the learning will come from actually going through the examples. So what are ethics? It's a guiding moral compass for the group. I love the metaphor of a compass when talking about values and ethics, because it's a compass points things in the right direction and is always pointing in the right direction, and that's what ethics is all about. It's your values and the values that drive your behaviour. So ethics guide behaviour and inform decisions. When you're very, very clear on what your ethics are and what your values are, then it makes decision making a whole lot easier. And they provide a standard of what's right and what's wrong. So a good example, if you want to do some homework on this, is to watch the movie called The Confession. And it stars Ben Kingsley and Alec Baldwin. And in the movie, just keeping it very brief, Ben Kingsley, a Jewish father, takes his son to a hospital. His son is very sick and he cannot get anyone to have a look at his son and help him out. He sees a couple of doctors having a smoko, approaches them, they refuse to have a look at his son as well, and long story short, his son dies. Ben Kingsley blames the doctor for not having a look at his son, goes home, gets a gun, comes back and kills the doctor. So after agonising all night, he confesses, goes to the police station and confesses, and then Alec Baldwin is hired by his company to get him off the charge. And in a discussion in the jail prior to the court case, Alec Baldwin says to Ben Kingsley, "It must be difficult to do the right thing." Ben Kingsley says, "No, it can be difficult to know what the right thing is, but when you know what the right thing is, it's difficult not to do it." And I think that's a great example of what ethics is all about. When your ethics and values are very clear, it makes it very easy to do the right thing. So summing it up, ethics is all about doing the right thing. So let's have a look at some examples now of the kind of things that can come up for you in a CRC, and then have some discussion on that. So Lynn, I'd like to bring you into the discussion here, and of course Andrew as well. Wouldn't want to cut Andrew out. So the first thing is honesty and integrity. So to me, honesty and integrity is all about obviously telling the truth, and telling the truth in a very compassionate way, because sometimes, the truth can hurt. But it's about telling it as it is, telling it quickly and telling it with compassion. And that's whether it's the board or the staff. So Lynn, some comments on that, please.
I guess it is a really important point, and something that we sometimes might not realise how important it is. So you need to be honest with your other co-workers, and the same extends to in the boardroom. If someone's not meeting the ethical standards that you've set, for example, it's up to the chairperson and the other board members to actually point that out. Say, look, we agreed that we would be meeting on time and you're constantly late would be a good example where there's been a set of behaviours that have been set, and if not all people are abiding by that, the honesty, integrity is about doing something about that as quickly and in a polite and respectful manner, which would probably be another behaviour or ethics that's been set by a group when they get together.
So let's talk about respect and courtesy as well, because it's about respecting people's positions and also respecting other people's opinions, I think, and not running roughshod over people.
Yeah. And that could come up in situations where you may be on the board in a CRC and you're also a volunteer in the centre. So this would be a really good example, is that when you're a volunteer, you need to respect the coordinator or the manager of the centre in their role, because you then are in a different position. So, and then you need to be respectful and act in that position as that role that you're a volunteer in, as opposed to taking your a step outside that other position. So I guess, respect and courtesy all times, I think we can assume it, but actually acting it out is really important, and carrying those behaviours. And as a board member, I think you're the people that are looked to, that people expect that are setting, as you said, John, the moral compass for the organisation.
Yes, that's right. And I think it goes all the way down to the staffers and how the staff treat customers and people that are coming into the CRC as well. To treat everybody with the same respect and courtesy, treat people how you would like to be treated. Andrew, anything you'd like to add to that?
I think that's a really good point, John, about the respect and courtesy, and I think it's really just keeping everything in perspective. Like, sometimes we get really worked up about how the board's working, how we're operating together, if people aren't sort of, I guess, pulling their weight properly, and sometimes we can get really tense about that. And I think at times we just got to take a chill pill and think, well, come on, in the bigger picture, how much of drama is this? And like you alluded to earlier, Lynn, just, let's be reasonable in how we put our views forward, and just make sure that everyone can still continue to work together, because if we really get stuck into people that we're working with, the relationship's really going to go downhill, and it's going to make it a real challenge from there on.
Yes, and I think it's so important as well to get everybody on the board, and even with the staff as well, to agree to accept and receive feedback on all these things. And not take it personally.
Exactly. It's almost like setting the culture of the organisation. So it plays a role in your behaviour and how you as an organisation and the type of cultures that you want to portray. Absolutely.
Another thing that comes up quite a lot is accountability, and people being accountable for their decisions. And obviously making decisions, hopefully the right decisions, but standing by them, being accountable for them, and not laying blame or trying to justify afterwards. Lynn, anything on that before that leads us into conflict of interest as well?
Yeah, they're both very closely linked, of course. So one is, understanding conflict of interest and when they might arise. But I guess when we're talking about accountability, is being accountable for the decisions that you make. So if there is a conflict that arises, that you understand what the conflict is and it's appropriately managed, but that you can stand by the decision on which you've made. And if I may just give an example, and you can maybe expand a bit on it, but some examples of conflict of interest would be where you may have relationships or ties to someone who's providing supplies and goods or services to the CRC. You might be on another committee in the town. So there's another example where you may have a bit of a conflict of interest, and you need to make sure that you're making the best decision for the organisation which you're sitting on, and you're not making any bias, and you can stand by that decision that you're making in the best interest of that organisation. And some other common examples, particularly in small regional and remote towns, is employees that are relatives that might be employed within the organisation. Andrew, you might want to comment on that.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. I see that a lot, having worked with a lot of CRCs, and I think in this case it's probably more of a matter of managing a perception as much as anything. And I think the critical part here is that when you talked about sort of disclosure beforehand, is that you can say that the relative has gone through a process the same as anyone else, and that they come out as the best candidate through an equal process. So to me, it's really dealing with the real conflict of interest, but also managing the perceptions to say, you know, this is a reality. They actually were the best person, and we're in a small town. I can't help it if I'm related to them. It wasn't my choice.
Yeah. And sometimes that perceived conflict can be just as damaging or even more damaging than a real conflict of interest. So it is an important thing. So legally, there's a requirement to declare where you have a financial interest in a decision. So legally, you're not allowed to participate in that decision. But the perceived is where, again, there may be a relative that's applying for a job or might be tendering for services. And although you're not personally receiving a financial benefit from that decision, the issue is that there could be a perception, and that's when you need to also note that, and that would be something that you would note in your declaration of conflicts, that you've got these relationships. And it would be in the best interest of the organisation to actually step out of that decision-making process. So again, that comes back to the accountability, that you're accountable. So you could say, look, I wasn't involved in that decision. Here, you know, there's clear evidence about the way that we handled this and managed this process. So again, it's about being accountable for the decisions that you make.
Yes, and I think you made a key point there, Lynn, that it's not just about saying there's a conflict of interest, but then it's acting accordingly and noting that, so that if there is any comeback later on, then you've got evidence that it was all upfront and open and transparent. That leads us on to another point as well, and that's confidentiality and privacy. You talk about employing relatives and friends to the organisation, but you know, there's a lot of confidential and privacy issues that come up with that. So, Lynn,
yeah,
this is really your episode, Lynn.
It sounds like it. Spotlight's on me. Yeah, so confidentiality. Yeah, I mean, again, small towns, even more important to manage these appropriately. So being aware that the information that's received is confidential. I mean, it would be rare in a governance or a board role that you would have privy to personal information, but there may be cases around employment issues or a grievance against the organisation or something that's come back. So you need to, again, you'd normally sign a confidentiality agreement, understand what that actually means, what's the bounds of that, the laws that underpin that, the privacy laws, and again, how you actually manage that. So yeah, all important issues.
Absolutely. And again, it comes down to having a policy and having procedures and agreements to make these things happen. Use of resources, and this is an interesting one. Obviously, the CRCs can have some pretty nice toys for people to use and things like that, but there needs to be some sort of policy and agreement on what board members or staff members can actually use. Any examples on that, Andrew?
I guess the things I see in a lot of the CRCs, they have fantastic computer facilities, fantastic printing facilities, and that sort of thing. And you know, and it could be the temptation perhaps to run off some brochures for your local footy club as a favour, or whatever club you're involved in. So I think that probably needs to be really clear on what's in and what's out. And I guess that's going to have some tax implications too as well, in terms of fringe benefits tax and those sort of issues as well. So you start to see a bit of a domino effect if things aren't made clear right from the start about what's in and what's out in relation to use of resources, in my view.
Look, you probably could also be in breach of just your requirements under the Incorporations Act by giving services if you're a member or a board member of the organisation. So yeah, it's a good point. There are implications you might not even be aware of. So clear guidelines and policies, fair and transparent, applies to everybody regardless of the position you have in the organisation.
And the other point on that is also about insurances. If your insurances say you're covered just for this use of resources, then you really got to stick with that, because if something goes wrong, it's not going to be pretty at all.
Yeah, or if things go missing or get damaged as well. So a lot of things to think about there. Employment of relatives and friends, we've talked about quite extensively. And the whole thing comes down to being transparent about what you're doing, the decisions that you're making, and making sure that there is an audit trail to come back to. Lynn, anything you want to add on that point?
You know, can't emphasise enough. You do have contracts with funding bodies, and you're accountable to your stakeholders and members, the community who pay tax that, you know, goes ultimately to the community resource centres. So being transparent and remembering that this is you're there to look after the organisation for the time being that you're elected into those roles, and so as a whole the organisation is owned by the whole community. So.
Yeah, and it's all about having integrity with the community and everyone seeing that you're doing the right thing.
That's right. Yeah.
So it comes back to my point earlier, it's about doing the right thing. So let's have a look at a code of ethics and conduct and what something like that would entail. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks, John. I think it really draws on your previous point when you talked about transparency. To me, having this code of ethics and conduct is a great way to prove that through a documented process that you've actually got transparency in your organisation. So a code of ethics and conduct, I think it's really just a matter of taking the values you talk about in your ethics and I guess giving a practical way of showing how this maps out into our organisation through our conduct. And to me, our conduct is really about our behaviours. It's talking about what we do in the workplace and how we map it out. So the reason to me why we have one is not only for internally within the organisation so people can see this is how we do things around here and why we do it. I think it's just as important to manage perceptions outside the organisation for people to see, well, I can see these guys are pretty fair income about the way they work together. And anybody who steps out of that line, there's going to be some consequences. And to me, I think that's pretty important for your community around you that they know that.
Yeah, I think it's an incredibly valuable tool as well when you're recruiting people to the board or you're recruiting staff, is to say this is how we do things around here. These are our values, these are the things we believe in, this is how we behave. And then you've got everybody on the same page, everybody pointing in the same direction. There can be no misunderstandings later on. Absolutely.
So to me, that really shows that there is these multiple uses for your code of conduct and that everyone really needs to be clear that it's a really valuable tool to have that match of your code of ethics and conduct together. And for me, I always talk about the cafe examples, and for me it's just some simple things about punctuality, being there before your shift, ready to go, being focused, that you're there ready to work, not catch up about the weekend or when you're away on your last holiday, and that you're there to be in a professional manner, that you're really there to serve the customers that come in and make the experience really good for them. And to me, that just maps straight across to a CRC experience, that this is what we're here to do, and people are really on board with that right from the start. Lynn or John, your views on that, are they as extreme as mine? Or?
Yes, I mean, customer service keeps coming up. To me, ethics is about values and what you believe in and what you believe is right, doing the right thing, and then conduct is your actual behaviour that demonstrates that. So, Lynn?
Yeah, I agree, and agree with what you're saying. And having it written down and being really clear about that from the beginning as early as possible, so that you set, again, I guess, the culture or the standard of behaviour right across the whole organisation is really important.
And you made a good point, having it written down. And I always recommend that boards go through a process of actually working out what their values and code of conduct is, and that it's not something that's just handed down as we do this, but actually discuss it and understand values and how values drive behaviour, and then on an ongoing basis review it on a regular basis.
Yep.
So, Andrew?
Yeah, I agree 100% that the people involved in it do have to have that ownership of it. So and we've talked about this in previous episodes, if people's values don't align with the organisation, then we've really got to consider, are they a proper board member or a good choice? And even though in a lot of small country towns where it's difficult to get people on your committees, I think having the bad choice of a person is worse than having no choice. I think you're going to spend a lot of time mopping up after those kind of messes. I think it'd be really worthwhile talking now about taking that bit step further. We talked about the documentation of the code of ethics and conduct into an agreement that people are really on board with. this is really, I guess, getting people to literally sign up to say, yes, we really are aligned to this, and we're willing to sign basically a declaration to say, yes, this is the way we will operate, this is the way we'll conduct ourselves, and these are the behaviours that we'll show in the workplace that will actually be proof of that. John, you've got quite a bit of experience with these sort of agreements. I'm interested to hear a couple of examples from you.
Yes, Andrew, it's getting people to sign on that dotted line makes that sort of commitment, and people don't sign something lightly, you would hope anyway. So having the Code of Ethics and Conduct Agreement written up, getting people to sign it after they, or as part of the induction when they come on board, then it really sets the scene, and there's no way around it. They can't say they didn't know. And then,
yeah, I guess it probably also falls back to your occupational health and safety. So having that embedded in the organisation is also another, probably not just ethical reason, but a legal reason that you need to do it as well. So how do you actually handle complaints and grievances and workplace issues?
That's a really good point in terms of having those procedures in place so all members of the board understand how we go about handling those sort of situations. We've got examples like the workplace grievances, handling complaints. Lynn, you've already just mentioned that, and reporting unethical behaviour. And that's a really important one. I think it's often let slip in organisations where people see it and they sort of think, oh, this feels a bit uncomfortable. I'm not really sure what I should do about it. And we've talked in previous episodes if standing by and allowing it to happen is almost giving permission for allowing unethical behaviour to happen. John, I'm really interested just to hear you again about that, because I think it's a really important point.
yes, I find quite a lot in organisations, businesses or not-for-profits, that people see unethical behaviour, they see things going on, but they're afraid to report them. And again, it comes back to what Lynn was saying before about the culture of the organisation. It's about creating that culture on the board and amongst the staff where people feel that they can report things, they can sort of put their hand up and say, hang on a minute, we don't do things that way around here, and then they're not going to be punished, or there's going to be no retribution because they've done that. So it doesn't matter whether it's the chairperson that they're talking about or one of the staff members. They need to feel comfortable, and everybody needs to have that agreement.
Yeah. And again, as you were talking about before, coming back to, what's the process for that and documenting it. So sometimes we get busy and it's quite difficult to do these things after an incident, trying to think it through before an incident. So it doesn't need to be overly complex if you're a small organisation, but you can always refine and improve, but to get something in place and think through some of the situations that might arise. And again, MSO has some great tools and templates there to assist you with that. Yep. And
that's a really good point, Lynn. Like, to me, having had a look through MSO, it's a great tool. So I think the biggest challenge for people in dealing with ethics is getting overwhelmed about what should we cover, what shouldn't we cover. And if you're looking to MSO, you've got things like tools for dealing with conflict of interest. You've got the confidentiality and policy agreements in there. You've got the tools to manage privacy there, as well as looking at the anti-discrimination type tools we talked about earlier. So to me, it's all there for you. It's really just a matter of working out, okay, in this CRC, what are the ones we need to have in place, and how do we adapt them to our CRC? Lynn, I'd like some of your expert comments on that, given you're the guru of MSO.
I think the main point is you don't need to. You've got a really good base there to start from, on which you can build the policies and procedures that are relevant to your organisation. And not only on MSO is there the policies, but it actually gives you some fact sheets and a little bit of training, and there's other resources that sit around it, because that's the common mistake, is people just pull policies off the shelf and put them into a policy manual and never seen again. So what's really great about MSO is that you can't do that, because it actually gives you, and here you need to work out what you're going to do in your organisation. So it steps you through the process, but also if you're not sure about a particular thing, it'll actually give you some exercises or fact sheets to talk a little bit more around that. You can use them as discussion for staff, for training, to actually embed this into the organisation, as opposed to it just being in a policy manual. because again, coming back to occupational health and safety and employment law, what they look for is not whether you've got the policies, but actually how they're actually used within the organisation and what you're doing with them. You probably see that a bit, John.
That's right. You've got to say what you do, but you've also got to show that you do it as well.
Yeah.
And sometimes people get a little bit confused between policies and procedures. And the procedure is how you implement the policy. So if you've got good procedures in place, workplace grievance is a good example, then immediately people know it can go to the procedure and know exactly how to go about exercising that policy and those values.
So yeah, and probably just on that, who to talk to, what happens if you're not happy with the answer, what's the next step. So it's a useful tool for both management, employees or board. So it doesn't matter where the issue is arising from, it should step you through that process.
I really like your idea, Lynn, of maybe bringing these out perhaps once every board meeting. So perhaps one of the parts of a board meeting would be we have a set time where we talk about a policy in there so people understand it, especially if you've got new people coming on board. It'd be a good way to step them through it so everyone's on the same page at the same time. And I'd suggest the same in a staff meeting as well, to say this week's or this month's staff meeting, this fortnight's staff meeting, whatever frequency you're having is, we're going to talk about this policy, and as John mentioned, the procedure, so you know how to implement it as well. So it becomes something that's a constant rather than, like you said, Lynn, something that's just sitting on the shelf there. I think we've had some really interesting discussions in terms of ethics. Just to, I guess, put it into perspective for us all and see what we've covered today, we've looked at being able to develop a code of ethics and conduct policy, making sure that's in place and everybody understands it, and as we just mentioned, making sure it's something that's, I guess, alive in the organisation and not just another thing that gathers dust on the shelf, in theory, of course. We talked about the importance of getting people aligned to that by signing up to an agreement for both staff and the board. And we talked, and as John's always mentioned, the importance of having a procedure that works, so something that people understand how to implement the policy with, and also that importance of reviewing that regularly, making sure we're really clear that this is how it works in the organisation and how we're going to use it. And we just wrapped up then again, more of the practical tools and templates that you can grab from MSO. Think about how they fit within your organisation, talk about this to your board members and staff, and importantly adapt them, because they're simple, they're ready-made, they're there for you, and I'd reckon, why wouldn't you? Be mad if you don't. Thanks again, guys, for joining us in this episode. For you people out there, please make sure that you go back through the workbook and think of what are the big 3 things I really need to grab and apply and understand from today's episode, and get back and talk to your colleagues about those. Remember, MSO has heaps of fantastic resources for CRCs. Here are just a few that we recommend that are most relevant to today's episode. Coming up, we're into really bringing it all together with episode 10, thinking about all the different concepts of the governance plan and bringing them all into one. John, thanks again for joining us and providing us direction here on ethics. You're helping me get back on track and get my life going forward again. It's been really appreciated.
You're welcome, Andrew. Just give me a call anytime. Very interesting topic and a very important one as well.
Absolutely. And Lynn, thanks again so much for your expertise. It's really valued, and certainly I'd call on any CRC if they need some assistance to get in touch with WACOS and yourself.
Yep, great, thank you. Yeah, it's great.
Thanks, folks. Looking forward to seeing you in episode 10. Bye now.